Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 684 of People Behind the Science. Today, we are looking forward to revisiting our conversation with our guest, Dr. Ohara Augusto, originally released on November 21st of 2016. Ohara's research career has been dedicated to examining how free radicals and related oxidants are produced in organisms and how they can affect an organism's physiology and potentially contribute to disease. Ohara is a leader in her field who has received numerous national and international awards for her research. So listeners, get ready to hear from another remarkable scientist in this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. Listeners, today I am thrilled to introduce you all to Dr. Ohara Augusto. So, Ohara, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. How are you?
I'm fine, and thank you for having me.
Well, we are delighted to have you here with us today, and we're excited to learn more about what you do in life and in the lab. But first, I want to introduce you to our listeners. So, listeners, just a little bit of detail here about Ohara. She is a professor in the Department of Biochemistry at the Institute of Chemistry at the University of São Paulo. She is also director of a network studying the redox process in biomedicine. Now, Ohara completed her undergraduate degree in chemistry and her PhD in biochemistry at the University of São Paulo, and afterwards she conducted postdoctoral research at the University of California, Berkeley, and at the University of California, San Francisco, before returning to the University of São Paulo to join the faculty there. Now, Ohara has also received many awards and honors for her work, including being named a Fellow of the Oxygen Society, as well as a member of the Academy of Sciences of the State of São Paulo, the World Academy of Sciences, and the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. Ohara is also the recipient of the Silver Medal for Biology and Medicine from the International Electron Paramagnetic Resonance Society, and she has also been named Commander of the Order of Scientific Merit by the Presidency of the Republic. And Ohara is with us today, listeners, to talk about her experiences in life and science. So, Ohara, today we are excited to learn more about you, both as a scientist, but also just as a person in general. So, can you tell us how you spend your time when you're not doing research?
Well, I enjoy simple things such as cooking, particularly special meals for friends. I also enjoy listening to music, and frequently I go to concerts. Also, I enjoy popular music, including rock. I also go to art expositions, go to see movies, theater plays, and I also like reading books. Also, my time is getting less and less for reading books unrelated to science, but I enjoy reading them when I have some time.
Absolutely. I totally understand you there. I feel like I'm reading more and more journal articles and less books lately.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned you love cooking. Do you have a favorite food that you love to cook?
I like doing a Brazilian dish that is called feijoada. It's something that you don't have in the States. I don't think you have in any other country. And I also like to cook the paella. That's a Spanish food.
Awesome. Well, it sounds delicious. And it sounds like you have a lot of different things keeping you busy outside of the lab, I must say.
Yes, cooking, you use a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, you got to make the dishes with love and care. Yep.
And also, I don't work in the lab too much anymore because you have other things to do. Cooking is a kind of lab, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a beautiful form of chemistry, I think. So can you tell us a little bit more about your lab work and the kinds of work you do and maybe how you describe it to someone who might not be familiar with your field?
Well, all my career, I always worked to understand how free radicals and related oxidants are produced in organisms and how they affect organisms' physiology. When I started my PhD, I already worked with biological oxidations. But at that time, very few investigators considered radicals important in biology. And even the few believers considered that radicals and oxidants were necessarily toxic to living organisms. But presently, it's well established that radicals and oxidants are continuously producing organisms during their metabolism and during their interaction with the environment, and that radicals and oxidants play crucial roles in physiological and pathophysiological process. And actually, I'm happy to have contributed to establish such a view. More recently, it's becoming more and more accepted that the organism's health depends on the precise control of its redox process. That is, the oxidation reduction process where you have exchange of electrons, and these processes are those that produce radicals and oxidants. And they are crucial. So I think that the area that started a little bit slowly now is becoming a main basis of biology, medicine, and it's very exciting to participate in this field.
Absolutely. I think we've come such a long way in our understanding of these compounds.
And we still have a lot to understand. So
that's the mark of good science.
So this is the reason why I'm still because I'm kind of old now, and I'm still very motivated to work in this field.
Well, speaking of motivation, I know going in and doing the science is very motivating in and of itself, but do you have a particular quote or a saying that you love that really keeps you motivated?
I don't think I have many quotes, particularly in science, but during my life or my life behavior, it's basically two main quotes. That which does not kill us, make us stronger.
That's a good one.
Yeah, the other I like is never imposes on others what you would not choose for yourself. I think that I base my behavior on these two quotes.
Gotcha. I think that's great to keep those things in your mind as you're going through life, because there's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of challenge in science. And if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger.
Exactly.
Thinking maybe about how you treat people in your lab, how you work with collaborators. Don't do things to others that you wouldn't want to deal with yourself. So great applications to science as well as life in general. And now I'm curious, Ohara, are there people who you may have encountered in your career who really inspired you or motivated you to pursue science?
Yes, I think I had two major that made me start in science, because I started a little bit late because of the years, the country where I am in. It was Francisco Nóbrega that really made me fascinated with biochemistry, and my first supervisor, Giuseppe Cilento, that really taught me how to behave doing science. I think these two people were very important to my career.
Certainly. So can you tell us where this interest in science began? You mentioned that maybe you started a little bit late pursuing this career. Where did your love of science start?
Well, there is not a point that I can say, but when I was a kid and I came from lower middle class, I really had no contact with science. We should remember that we're by the 50s of the last century. Mm-hmm. So no internet, and Brazil also in the middle class, you hardly hear about science. I didn't even know you could make a career in science. So I decided to go not to traditional high school, but I went to a technical school where I learned to be a chemical technician. Mm-hmm. I chose that because I thought that I would have a job opportunity, and also because I like books about alchemy. And I did not learn too much in those years, but I loved the lab. Really, the lab fascinated me. All the colors, the spells, and all the instruments. I was really fascinated. And then I decided to go to university and obtain a BS in chemistry. But during my BS, I had to work at night. I was a high school teacher. And so I didn't have much time between going to classes and teaching at night to go to the labs that were doing science. So I didn't have much contact with science.
Gotcha.
But so I became friends with Nóbrega, that I told you about before.
Sure.
And he was returning from his PhD in the States, and he was so fascinated and he was so enthusiastic about what he did that started to get into it also.
It's contagious, I think, yeah.
Yeah. And suddenly he linked to me his own copy of the book Leninger, Principles of Biochemistry, by Leninger, that was appearing, I think, in 1971 in the States, was the first edition of the book. And reading the book, I was really, again, very impressed by the connections between biology and chemistry. And so I decided to go to do my PhD. And from then on, I started getting really hooked to science.
Well, Ohara, I love this story. And I think it's sort of the story of the underdog. Like you said, you had never heard of science. You maybe grew up in this lower middle class background where you didn't have a lot of opportunity, maybe didn't have as much exposure to what potential careers were out there. Can you tell me a little bit more about this balancing work and school while you were an undergraduate, also trying to teach high school biology? How did you manage that?
Well, it was not easy, and actually, you are supposed to, here in Brazil at least, to do your graduation in 4 years to get the BS. And I did it in 5 years because I didn't do all the disciplines that were required at each year because of this teaching work.
Gotcha.
So it was, I did 1 year more.
Yeah, it's way more common now. So yeah.
It was the price I paid.
Sure, sure. So now can you tell us, were there any other key moments that really stick out in your mind on your scientific journey that got you from that point of starting to pursue this career in science to where you are today?
I think it's probably your personality also. For sure, I always was curious. I like to read. And science, as you said, is contagious. Start doing it, you get stimulated by it. You would like to find the answers, to know how the process works, and you go on and on. It's difficult to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I mentioned in our introduction that you did some of your postdoctoral work after your PhD at the University of California, both at Berkeley and San Francisco. Can you tell us about your experiences there? Was it a challenge to move to the United States and start working in a lab there?
The problem was when I finished my PhD, I accepted a job, again, the problem about how to survive.
Sure.
In education faculty that they were opening Universidade de Campinas. So I went to the education school there, but I didn't get really attached to it. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe I would because I was teaching high school, but I didn't. So I decided to go back to science. And actually, it's very different if you compare Brazil. Now, Brazil is more similar to the States, but in the early 70s, it was not like that. And I did a concourse to get a position at the university, and then I was approved. And I spent 2 years more after my PhD here in Brazil. So I was very prepared to go to the States. I want to go, but I had to do some things here before, some teaching. And I really want to go to the States to learn how to detect free radicals. This was my major objective at those days. So I went to Berkeley to work with Lester Packer because they had experience with this electron paramagnetic resonance. That's the only way to detect directly free radicals. So I was really prepared and it was easy. For sure, the English, that was the first time that I went out from my country. And you get lonely when you start, but afterwards you make friends. And it's okay, you go. And the science was very interesting. I had many things to learn, and I did. And after I stayed 1 year learning EPR, I was more interested at those days in drug metabolism. And Lester Parker's lab was not that much. So I moved to Paul Ortiz de Montellano's lab, that was in San Francisco, and applied what I learned with the EPR in drug metabolism. and it was very good. We got very interesting results, and I think it was the first time we really identified a radical produced by an enzyme that was not peroxidase, that this was known, but we showed that cytochrome P450 would oxidize some drugs to free radicals. So it was very productive. I was very excited about all these things. And it was not difficult at all. I had a really good time. San Francisco is a beautiful city. Nothing to complain.
Right. Well, you've made it sound easy, Ohara. And we've talked a little bit about your work, just kind of touching on what you're doing with free radicals and oxidants and this process called EPR, which allows you to detect them. And now then getting interested in the drug metabolism world. Now, can you tell us, what are you working on now that you're really excited about?
Right now, I'm working in many things, actually, but my major interest is about protein aggregation. How the oxidation of some proteins led to protein aggregation, knowing that protein aggregation is a hallmark of many age-related diseases.
Sure, we think of things like Alzheimer's and dementia, yeah.
Exactly. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis that I'm also interested. So I'm interested in mechanisms by which these things occur. So I'm putting a lot of efforts in this area.
Perfect. Well, very cool. And this work I think is really interesting because, like you said, it has so many applications to a lot of different disease states. So can you tell us, is there maybe one particular discovery that you've made recently that you're really excited about?
Not so recently now, but some years ago, we discovered a new post-translational oxidative modification that I think that is really important for protein aggregation. Is the D-tryptophan cross-linking. I did this mostly in vitro, but now we are trying to see if this modification is present in some protein aggregates that are found in patients and also in animal models of disease.
Very cool. Well, wonderful to hear more about your work. And I know we've kind of talked in our discussion of your career path about some of the challenges that you've faced as you've gone through your career. But I think these are really important to discuss with scientists because I think we spend so much time focusing on our successes and telling those stories, but you don't hear about all the hard work, toil, and trouble that came before them. So, Ohara, do you have a story of a challenge or a failure that you can share with us today?
Well, I can say only that it's difficult to do science in a country that today we call emerging countries, maybe a little bit underdeveloped in some parts that's like Brazil. So we have so many problems that sometimes I really needed to think about what does not kill me will make me stronger to keep going. I think in most failures, well, we have negative results several times, but nothing that impact too much the research. Change a little bit because the thing's not as you supposed. It's not. You have to accept it. Mm-hmm. I think the most difficult is to keep going when some things like that, your compounds don't arrive at time. When you are doing some competitive work and knowing if you were in the States or Europe, the drugs would arrive in 2-3 days. Here can take 2 months, 3 months.
Oh, wow.
So this is the hard thing that we all have to face. I think this is my major problem.
Gotcha. So how do you cope with this, or kind of what keeps you from throwing in the towel and quitting when you're facing one of these frustrating situations where it should work, but it just doesn't?
Well, I think it's the love for science that keeps me going.
Gotcha. Well, I think that is something that definitely keeps scientists motivated. And whenever you're facing one of these challenges, it's just the curiosity, the love of what you're studying. So great to hear about some of the challenges that you face in your position today. But we don't just want to talk about the tough times, Ohara. Can you tell us about one of your success stories, one of these happy moments in science, whether it was a huge win or even just a small victory that meant a lot?
I recall two in particular that you feel that joy of your hypothesis been proved.
Sure.
One was when I was in Ortiz de Montellano's lab, and one experiment that I always do the same way, I got a green pigment, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Another day I arrived to get what I'm used to say green, and I see a red pigment. I said, well, I did something wrong. How can it be?
Right. What happened?
So I divided. I said, maybe I said, what I forgot. And I repeated the experiment and divided it in two. One with oxygen, the other without oxygen. And the next day, because we need time for that, I went and boom. The one that was green, the other was red.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and after we discovered that was an alkylation of the radical on the heme moiety. And you have a migration. Oh, this is a little bit more complicated, I don't know too. But anyway, it was something that makes light, and it's very gratifying, including with colors. It's completely different. That sometimes I'm very pleased when I see in my lab all these colored vials, because when you have colored vials, sometimes you don't see these differences that sometimes are important.
Mm-hmm.
This was one thing. Another that was very happy was when we could detect the carbonate radical in a reaction. It was the first time that the carbonate radical was demonstrated at physiological conditions. And many people was after that radical, and we could do it here in Brazil before. So it was very important. It was really a joy when you see the result coming and you feel, wow, we got it. So I think it was my joy moments in science. I had many others.
Definitely those eureka moments that I think every scientist lives for.
Exactly.
Well, I love how you're describing this sort of visual representation of success, just being able to actually literally see these pigments and you know that there's something cool going on.
Uh-huh.
Now, with this detection of the carbonate radical, was this something as well that you walked in and literally you could see it immediately, or did you have to kind of page through the data and put it together?
No, you can see immediately, but in an instrument. We use the EPR instrument to see.
Gotcha.
So it was not so visual.
Yeah.
It's when you see the pen of the instrument going up and down.
Gotcha.
But it was very thrilling also.
Definitely. Well, congratulations, Ohara, on these two successes as well as many of your others. And I love talking to scientists about all these success stories because I think there's a lot of time in science where you're slaving away on these projects and it could be years before you finally see that aha, eureka moment. So
you need to be persistent.
Absolutely. So now we've talked a little bit about how you love to read in your free time when you're not in the lab. And I'm curious to hear, what books do you have on your bookshelf right now? Or do you have a few favorites that you can recommend to me and our listeners?
As I told you, I'm not reading too much right now. And I had some in my Kindle to read.
Mm-hmm.
I liked very much, but it's one book that I read some time ago. That was The Consilience by Wilson, when he discusses this necessity of the humanities to be cross-fertilized with science.
Cool.
For us to face all the challenges humanity is facing and the others that will come. I think it was very interesting. Of more general literature, I like the one by Jonathan Littell, The Kindly Ones.
So what's this one about?
It's a novel about the story of World War II, written by an SS officer. So it's a hard book, but it's very interesting. It makes you think about several things in life, humanity and our problems, and also the joy of life.
Definitely. And it sounds like maybe a different perspective of the history that many of us don't see. So very cool. Well, thank you for these recommendations. We'll put them on our website for our listeners to find there. And now I want to talk a little bit about travel opportunities, because I think this is one of the wonderful aspects of science that a lot of people enjoy, being able to work with people across the globe and travel to share your research. So, Ohara, do you have a favorite travel experience that you have done for science that you could tell us about?
Well, I think that going to Japan for a congress in Kyoto was really remarkable. It was wonderful because I really could feel the cherry blossom. Was amazing. And also, I thought was very important, it was a long time ago when I went there, also to feel part of the Asian traditions that are so different from ours. Despite all the globalization, we still have these differences. It was very remarkable. I think it was what I enjoyed most of my travels.
Absolutely. I just recently went to Japan for the first time last year in Kyoto. It wasn't cherry blossom season, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to go back. But
it was wonderful.
So can you tell us a little bit about it? Was there festivals going on, or were you able to just kind of walk through and see all the beautiful trees?
Exactly. It was a congress, but I spent 1 week after the congress. And so I had this opportunity to go to the park and do as they do, that you go and you lay down and it stays contemplating the cherry blossom trees. It's very interesting.
Well, it sounds absolutely lovely. It sounds like this Congress was a great experience, a great way to get out to a different place, to share your science, to give presentations, but also to experience a completely different culture. So we've talked a little bit about some of the people that you've encountered throughout your scientific career. And I think the people in science are incredible. And I think this is one of those things where people often have certain perceptions in their minds about what scientists are like, or stereotypes about what scientists are like. And we try to break those on our show by showing a different side of science, the human side of science, as I like to call it. So Ohara, can you tell us about maybe an experience that you've shared with your colleagues, or one that you've had in a particular laboratory, of maybe a tradition that was developed, or a funny memory or funny story?
Yeah, I have some. One is that while I was doing my PhD, it was early 70s, and in the lab where I worked, the Chilentos lab, they had a place where a woman, a technician, made coffee in the morning and in the afternoon. And every day, many professors went through the lab to get the coffee and gossip about everything that was happening in the institute. Mm-hmm. So it was very entertaining. You cannot imagine this in a lab these days. Many people, some with suits, getting through the lab, the instruments, all the classwork, and go there and drink the coffee and gossip and gossip. And it was a tradition till I finished my PhD. And the other one is Kent Kunze. That was a postdoc, while I was also a postdoc in Ortiz de Montellano's lab. Kunze was a funny guy, very intelligent, and he was used to work all night.
Oh, really?
And he arrived in the lab completely red because he was going to play squash before. Uh-huh. And I don't know, he would like to make fun of me. He came over my shoulders. What are you doing? What are you doing? Yeah, sometimes I was very upset, but it was really funny because he was red, completely red, because he was squashes. You do a lot of aerobics.
Right, it's exhausting, yeah.
But he was not exhausted at all. We really got along very well. I learned a lot with him.
Definitely. And I think these sort of characters, these personalities that you meet in science are amazing, and maybe not exactly what people would expect. You have really hilarious, funny people that you encounter. And I love this tradition of the coffee breaks as well. So do you have coffee breaks, maybe not held directly inside your lab, but is this something where you kind of get your group together to chat about things?
We cannot have coffees in the lab for sure.
Right.
Well, sometimes you go and talk with somebody to get a coffee in the cafeteria, or we do seminars, but no food, no coffee in the seminars because you are not allowed to do that.
Right. I think it's funny to look back at how much the rules have changed since then, probably for our own good, but well, Ohara, thank you so much for sharing some of these fond memories with us today. And it's been great to talk about your work. And I think every scientist has these big questions that they are working to answer, but maybe there's something in their way. Things like funding, staff, technology, feasibility, just barriers to achieving your goals in science. So can you tell me, Ohara, if I took away all of the barriers, if I gave you everything, what is one question in science that you would really want to answer?
I have a question that actually I don't really know if I could be answered, but it puzzles me. Why the pair bicarbonate CO2, that's our major buffer, knowing that you can produce carbonate radical and other oxidants from it, what's the real role the bicarbonate buffer has on our organisms? It's very difficult to examine this because we need to do all in controlled atmosphere, but it's something that I really would like to answer.
Sure. Do you have any sort of prevailing hypotheses of what it might be?
I think it's much more important than it has been considered till now. I really think you have a major importance not only for the problems that the CO2 is bringing to us in the atmosphere, but I think also in our organisms. It plays more roles than we know up to now.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up some of the challenges here in terms of needing to have the controlled environment to run these experiments. And I think there's never a way to run the perfect experiment in science. You always have to compromise in some way.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, this is an interesting question to be working towards an answer to. And it's fun to chat about these big questions with your mentors, with your peers and collaborators and people that you encounter in science. But they're also great sources of advice throughout your career. So Ohara, can you think back across your whole career in science and all of the people who you've come into contact with and tell us, is there one piece of advice that you received that was so helpful that you want to pass on to our listeners today?
Don't give up. I think it's an important advice. Sometimes it's difficult because of money, because of fellowships, but if you enjoy science, keep going. I think it's worth. So keep it going would be the quote.
Yeah. I like it. Well, listeners, definitely don't give up out there. If you are passionate about science, keep pursuing it. I think it is such a rewarding career. Now, is there any other last piece of advice, Ohara, that you want to pass on to our listeners personally, or is there any inspiring note that you want to leave them with today?
No, I think that if you like science, enjoy it and pursue it.
Absolutely. And listeners, science should be fun. There are days when it maybe feels like it's not. But...
well, that is life. Some days nothing looks very good, but the days get better.
Yeah, you got to think about the big picture, I think, which is so exciting, having this career in science, being able to potentially have a big impact and make these discoveries, have these eureka moments like you described. So, Ohara, can you tell our listeners if they want to learn more about your work and about you, where should they go?
Well, they can use my email or Augusto at eq.usp.br. Or maybe one thing is good to consult is our homepage of our redox center. That's Redoxoma USP. Or you can use Google to find them.
Absolutely. I know I had Googled you earlier, so you do have a very unique name, which is awesome to help people find you out there.
It's easy to find it.
I like it. Well, listeners, definitely check out more about what Ohara is doing in the laboratory. Very cool stuff there. And Ohara, thank you so much for joining us on the show today and sharing a piece of your story.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure to speak with you. And listeners, thank you for joining us today as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to explore the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to chatting with you next time on People Behind the Science.